Okay, I'm David Orr. I'm chairman of the Environmental Studies program at Oberlin College in Oberlin, Ohio. We're out in front of the Adam Joseph Lewis Center at Oberlin College. It's the Environmental Studies building here on the campus. It's designed to be a zero discharge building, powered entirely by sunlight, made out of materials that are non-toxic. It is effectively the first substantially green building on a U.S. college campus. Well, Brad, the problems with the industrial food system have to do with this word sustainability. It simply is not a sustainable system. And the number of inputs required to make that system work are long and very fragile, starting with the energy requirements. And estimates vary from 11 calories to upwards of 70 calories of fossil energy to put 1 calorie of food on a plate. The average food molecule, it was said not long ago, moves 1,500 miles where it's grown or produced to where it's eaten. And now the number I've seen now numbers of 2,500 miles where it's grown or produced to where it's eaten. But the industrial food system requires a lot of fossil energy, and that's simply running out. We're coming up on what's being called the peak oil or peak oil extraction year, and no one knows exactly where that is. Some people think it's already been passed. Goldman Sachs, financial firm, believes that will be next year, but sometime in the next, certainly within the next decade, we'll pass the point of peak world oil extraction, not production. And at that point, the industrial food system is going to be hard-pressed to provide food for anybody. So the fossil energy inputs are one side of the problem. The second is, if you turn that coin over, the second problem is climate change. All the global circulation models show that mid-continental areas are going to get hotter and drier. So the breadbasket for the United States is going to be severely stressed. We simply can't sustain it. And then there are lots of other things. The industrial mindset brought to bear on agriculture was a wrong metaphor. It was a metaphor of the factory and turning land into factory systems. So this part of the country in the upper Midwest, certainly including Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and Iowa, was turned into a vast protein factory. Protein in the form of soybeans and corn shipped to slaughterhouses and confinement feeding operations where you concentrated pollution and all kinds of other environmental problems. And that system doesn't work. So if you begin to connect the dots of the U.S. food system and connect dead zones off the mouth of the Mississippi River, which is the size of the state of New Jersey and actually growing larger after Katrina. Groundwater depletion, the Ogallala Aquifer in the Midwest being drawn down. The obesity epidemic, 60% of Americans are said to be overweight, 30% obese. Begin to look at the system as a system, connecting all the dots. There's simply no way it can be sustained. It undermines health of people and land alike. But it couldn't be sustained even if it didn't, because the energy inputs are not going to be there to sustain it. Even if they were there, you couldn't burn the energy, fossil energy anyway, because of climatic change. So the system is, in the large, not sustainable. It doesn't promote the health of people or the land, and it's a system that will be very short-lived. And that points you to the alternatives, and the alternatives are to begin to relocalize the food system and begin to resuscitate a local agriculture. Numbers that you came up with several years ago, the $6.2 billion of food purchases in northeastern Ohio, and if I remember the numbers correctly, about 200 million of it was grown locally. Well, that system works only as long as you've got energy and have no other consequences that might impair the stability of the system, but we're long past that. But local agriculture is going to be the only way people will be fed dependably and in a healthy fashion in the 21st century. Changes. I can see urban farms, for example, urban agriculture being developed. Intensive agriculture, so people growing on fairly small acreages, lots of food, but that's labor intensive. It's also knowledge intensive. The industrial agriculture system was extensive. It required lots of outside inputs. It required very concentrated knowledge, mostly in land-grant institutions. But those days are over. This system is going to require a lot of labor. You're going to change the capital-labor ratio, I think, probably dramatically. A lot of the knowledge input is going to come from local people who just learn how to farm a particular place. So the knowledge of soil, seasons, plant and animal relationships, all kind of biological and ecological synergies are going to be established locally, and the knowledge base, I think, will be dramatically relocalized. It will be a system that, far from the specialized industrial system where you're producing primarily soybeans or corn, or rotating soybeans and corn, with lots of outside inputs. It'll be a system that is much more diverse, growing 20, 30, 40 different kinds of crops, all in a fairly small area. It'll be a system, I think, that will have to evolve largely without federal subsidies. And so a good bit of the political and social and economic apparatus around subsidized industrial farming is, I think, going to disappear. But the driving force for this is going to become scarcity and rising prices, and also increasing health concerns. And you can see, I think the organic market is growing at dramatically every year, but starting at a very low base. But that in time will grow to a substantial part of the food system. Well, I think educational systems can be, and particularly colleges and universities, ought to be leaders in this field. And you see more and more interest among college students to re-engage the land. I mean, you've seen this at the Jones Farm, and that's true at Dartmouth and Reed College and lots of other places around the country. But colleges can do several things. One is you can harness our buying power to local purchases. Colleges that say we'll buy locally will give a premium for organic production. All of a sudden can be a market and jumpstart the local economy for food. I think secondly, colleges can take a much more active role in building college farms. It's said that agriculture really needed to go to the land-grant institutions because it was a technical subject. And agriculture is, if anything, it's a liberal art. What's more liberal than food? I mean, it involves virtually every discipline in the curriculum. But think of college farms and college land being oriented to food production. Here at the Lewis Center, the landscape, as you know, is divided into three parts. The third part at the back of the building is a working landscape. We begin to reintroduce horticulture and food production, and the idea of edible landscaping, and the skill set necessary to use local landscapes for useful things, not just decorative things. So colleges can do a great deal to help jumpstart this, from buying power and also from education. But that's going to require, again, as you know, a pretty significant shift in how colleges see themselves. Instead of equipping students for jobs on board the economic equivalent of the Titanic, we'll need to equip them for jobs in a sustainable economy, and that's a radically different kind of economy. But it's one that cannot be subsidized, or will not be subsidized, by cheap fossil energy, because cheap fossil energy is going to be a victim. Trucks like that one going by are going to be a thing of the past. They'll be powered by electric motors made from electricity made from sunlight, or hydrogen made from sunlight in the future. But they will not give us the same energy return on investment that fossil fuels give us. That era is gone. We've burned off the best and cheapest and most easily available fossil fuels. Colleges ought to be leaders in this enterprise. Colleges ought to be out front, but that requires also that they've got the foresight to read the tea leaves or see the writing on the wall. But it's there. You know, when inputs get too expensive that you can't afford because of the rising cost of declining supplies of fossil fuels, when you can't afford fertilizer input, tractor fuels, and you have to serve a local market because the fuel to ship stuff long distances just isn't there, there's a radically different kind of farm that will have to be made. And imagine farms becoming not just places that sell sunlight in the form of plant materials and animal flesh, but also sell sunlight in the form of electrons with wind machines on farm fields, and farms being places where you sequester carbon. Your generation has got to eliminate 5 billion tons of carbon in the next decade, as the amount of energy and fossil fuel use continues to rise, even against peak oil prospect. As that continues to rise, that number will rise to 7 and 9 billion tons. And so farms as places that sequester carbon will become increasingly important. But it also means farms ought to be places that restore biological diversity. They ought to be much more labor, they will be much more labor intensively operated. Well, the energetics of farms indicate that if a farm has to supply all of its own energy on site for tractors and so forth, if it's for traction, you got about half your land goes to feed animals. If you're, say, an Amish farmer or you have horse-drawn equipment. If you don't have horse-drawn equipment, apparently about the same ratio goes into growing liquid fuels like canola or whatever to power tractors. So about half the farmland is going to have to go back and be rededicated to fuels and to energy simply to service what happens on the farm. What?
Yeah. Here, Tom, just point the mic in that way.
That's my story and I'm sticking to it. The energy required to put a pound of beef on the table is absolutely astonishing. And the amount of water and fossil energy that goes into beef production, especially if it's confinement fed, where you're moving corn and soybeans to confinement feeding operations far away, and then drawing down the Ogallala aquifer for the water inputs. I mean, the numbers are really quite astonishing. That can't be maintained. That's no bargain. But then we shouldn't be eating confinement fed animal flesh anyway. It's bad for you. We've got a whole generation of students that are essentially immune to the World War II miracle drugs because drugs are in animal feed, and it is both as a health to prevent disease, but also because it has the effect of fattening the animal. And so the health impacts of this are dramatic. So looking at agriculture as that kind of system, we can't afford it. We're spending anywhere from $14 to $25 billion per year to subsidize an agricultural system that is at the point of failure. And it didn't feed us very well in the past anyway. I don't know if that answered the question, but I've kind of forgotten what the question was. So.